My name is Paul. 72 years lived here in Rochester, New York. I've been a widower for 7 years and former Army sergeant. I've seen a lot of ugly things in my life, but nothing prepared me for what I saw in the mirror that morning. Have you ever woken up and not recognized yourself? Have you ever looked at yourself and had the impression that something inside your body was trying to warn you that a storm was coming? It was like that with me. That day, I went to wash, as usual. When I raised my head and saw my reflection, half of my face was swollen, reddened, pulling my eye down as if the skin had tired of fighting gravity. I thought of a sting, a silly allergy. But the more I stared at the mirror, the more I felt like I was something else, something deeper, more stubborn. And what came next? It wasn't just physical. It wasn't just pain or fever. It was the look of the people. It was the way a party turned into judgment. How a woman used me as a ladder to show off, and how later she herself was swallowed by her own poison. This is the story of how I was humiliated in silence, and how silence answered for me. But before we dive into the heart of this story, I need you to know something. There was a day when I was exposed in front of my entire family. I was sitting in a corner, my face still swollen, trying to pretend it didn't hurt me. And it was there, in the midst of laughter and raised glasses, that she pointed at me and sneered loudly. Her words went through the room like a knife. Many laughed. Others pretended they didn't hear. I remained silent. But weeks later, at the same kind of party, everyone looked at her. And it wasn't with admiration. It was with astonishment. It was as if the world said, "Now it's your turn." I won't tell you what happened yet. But it was there that silence ceased to be weakness and became justice. If you've ever felt that the world turned its back when you needed it most, or swallowed the pain so you wouldn't lose your dignity, then stay here with me. This story isn't just mine. It could be yours too. And if it touches your heart in any way, leave a like, subscribe. Not by numbers, but because each gesture like this reminds me that there are still people who feel the way we feel. We will go together until the end. In the days following that first mirror, the swelling didn't recede. It did. It started on the right side of the cheek, but in a short time, it went up to the eye. It got redder every morning, heavier, hotter. I woke up with the feeling that someone had hit me during the night, even though I didn't remember any dreams. The eyelid began to droop, and chewing became an effort. It felt like the whole jaw was being pulled from the inside. I spent the first 2 days trying to solve it at home. Cold compress, an anti-inflammatory that I had saved, a bitter tea that my late wife always made when someone was looking bad. But nothing worked. On the morning of the 3rd day, I looked in the mirror again and hardly recognized myself. Her right eye was already practically closed, and there was a throbbing pain behind her cheekbone. That's when I decided to go to Dr. Harold's clinic on Main Street. I've known him for years. He already attended me when I fell in the backyard, when I fractured my ankle cleaning the gutter. I have always been treated with respect, but this time I felt something different. When I took the scarf off his face, he frowned, stood up slowly, and called the nurse. "Paul, this looks like a subcutaneous abscess, an infection indeed. It could be facial cellulite. You will need to start antibiotics now. If it doesn't improve, it may have to drain. Hospitalize until drain." That kept hammering in my head. Drain, open, cut. An old face, now deformed, on top of that with a scalpel. I left the clinic with a bag of pills and an empty stomach. It wasn't fear of surgery. I had already been shot. It was shame, a deep shame, which I did not know I could feel. In the following days, I avoided leaving the house. I cancelled the haircut with Mr. Wallace. I ordered purchases over the phone. The delivery boy even tried to disguise it, but I know he noticed. I started to wear a scarf covering the side of my face, but the cloth bothered me, even more so in the heat. The sweat made it stick to my skin, and I felt like I was wearing a mask that embarrassed me more than it hid me. It's strange. We grow old, thinking that what will hurt the most are the back, the knee, the heart, but no one talks about the pain of seeing themselves different, of losing the face that you had already become accustomed to calling your own. I was no longer handsome. I didn't even care about that, but I always saw myself as a whole, dignified man with a face marked by life, not by disease. Now, I didn't know how to look at myself anymore. Will you allow me to pause here, just for a moment? Because I need to ask something that maybe only you who are listening to me will understand. Have you ever looked in the mirror and felt ashamed of a face that life gave you? Have you ever been afraid to leave the house because you knew people would look at you differently, with pity or disgusted? If this has ever happened to you, write here in the comments, just one sentence: "I've lived it. It touched me. It's true." Or just, "I believe." Because sometimes just knowing that someone understands, the pain becomes a little lighter. I went back to wearing a wide-brimmed hat, like in the old fishing days. Not for the sun, but to hide the shadow that the face made. He avoided mirrors. It darkened the rooms of the house. Even my plants began to wither, so much so that the windows were closed. It was as if I wanted the world not to see me. Not even me, but life. It is ironic. Just when I thought I was gone for good. The phone rang. It was my sister. With an excited voice, he invited me to a party. A family celebration. Everyone would be there. And there, in that seemingly innocent invitation, what I didn't imagine began. The part of the story where the pain would no longer be mine alone, and it would spread like an echo in a hall full of people. But what made me accept the invitation even in that state? And why did I know, deep down, that that party would not end like all the others? My sister Martha's voice was still echoing on the phone when I hung up. "It's going to be beautiful, Paul. Hank is turning 80. The whole family will be there. You can't miss it." Hank, my younger brother. A good man he always was. One of those who call on your birthday even if no one else remembers. A generous heart, even if half forgotten in the corners of family history. The party would be in Buffalo, in a hall rented by one of the nephews. It would be big, lively, full of people I hadn't seen in years. And that was precisely what held me back. I looked at the mirror, the same one, the morning of shame, and saw a stranger. The infection had not yet subsided. The right eye was better, but the cheek was still swollen, the skin reddened, and the contour of my face crooked, warped. A face that scared even dogs on the street. The desire to go was mixed with the fear of being seen. But don't go. Not going was like accepting that I was no longer part of the family, that my seat at the table could be filled without anyone missing it. Pride hurt, but loneliness, that one was unbearable. So I decided I would go. I started with the shower, slow, like someone preparing for a duel. I chose my blue button-down shirt, the one my wife liked best. I passed on an old cologne, one of those that we only use at baptisms or funerals. And I put on the wide-brimmed cap, which covered part of my face without looking like a disguise. In the car, with my hands firmly on the steering wheel, I rehearsed lines. "It's an infection, silly stuff. I'm almost good already. It was just an allergic reaction, but inside I cheered. I hoped no one asked anything, so that the looks were brief, so that I wouldn't be the topic of the night. I arrived in Buffalo with my heart beating faster than when I flew a helicopter in Vietnam. I parked the truck a little further away from the hall, took a deep breath, and walked slowly. Each step seemed to weigh more than the last. The voices inside were already echoing loudly, and when I opened the door, the smell of food and perfume came along with the laughter. It was like entering a world I was no longer a part of. People laughing, glasses toasting, children running between the tables. Most looked at me, some with surprise, others with discomfort. I tried to smile with the good side of my face. I greeted those closest to me. Martha received me with a tight hug and a light kiss on the forehead, as if thanking me just for my presence. They guided me to a table near the window, and there I stayed, noticed, heard. I carefully chewed a portion of pureed chicken. The fork was heavy, the jaw hurt. But what hurt the most, it was that feeling of being the elephant in the room. Until then, everything was under control, until she arrived, the woman who would make my face burn, not from infection, but of humiliation. And when she saw me, I felt something was about to happen. But what exactly would she do? And how was that hall, which seemed so full of life, going to be silent so suddenly? At first it was just looks. Cousins I hadn't seen since funerals, nephews who grew up and now seemed strange, grandchildren of others who didn't even know who I was, all looked at me as if I had come back from somewhere where people like me don't usually return. The conversations slowed down as I passed. The laughter turned to silence for seconds that were too long, and then came those polite, forced smiles who say hi, but think, my God, what happened to him? I pretended not to notice, but each of those looks was an invisible thorn that pricked slowly. I sat in a corner by the window. It was the only place where the wind came in, and the light didn't hit her face directly. I accepted a glass of white wine. I hardly drink anymore, but at that moment I thought that maybe it would go down better than the embarrassment. Food came soon after, a dish with roast chicken and wild rice. I cut small, chewed slowly, feeling my jaw complain with each movement. But the worst thing was not the pain in his face. It was silence. People around me talked, but never with me. They passed by, said, "How are you, Uncle Paul?" and disappeared. I smiled with the good corner of my mouth, thanked him for his presence as if the visit was mine, until she showed up. Olivia, tall, young, too well dressed for a family dinner. Daughter of one of the most distant nephews, raised in another city, full of followers on social networks, and from what I heard, the star of any meeting. And that's exactly how she entered, as if the world was the stage and the party had been set up just for her. She laughed out loud, took pictures, posed with a glass in her hand, and fiddled with her hair, as if she knew she was watched. And it was. But when her eyes met mine, the party stopped. Not because of what she said, not yet. He stopped by looking. She looked at me, as if she saw something out of place, like someone who sees an error in the family portrait. Eyes wide, then half closed, and finally, a smile in the corner. But not the good ones. It was a smile of someone who found the broken toy of the night, a warning. I didn't know yet what she would say, but my chest already felt it. Cruel things were coming. And when she opened her mouth, more came than I was prepared to hear. Because there are words that don't come out to hurt, they come out to kill. And in that room, lit and full of people, I learned that you don't have to be alone to feel abandoned. But what exactly she said, you might not believe me if I tell you. Are you ready to listen? Because that's where everything turned. She walked back and forth in the hall as if she owned the place. She adjusted her tight dress, laughed too loudly, took pictures with everyone, except me. It was as if my desk didn't even exist. But at some point she looked again. You saw me. This time, more calmly. Her eyes stopped on my face as if observing a crooked painting on the wall. A long look loaded with judgment and venom. I already knew this kind of look, but even so, something inside me froze. She walked up to a group that was standing a few meters from where I was, a noisy, laughing group of young people, and then, with a voice that crossed the entire party, she blurted out, "My God, look at that. It seems that the war has caught him again. Look at the face, you look like a zombie." Laughed, almost all of them. One or the other disguised it, but the laughter escaped. I felt as if the whole room had stopped just to echo that phrase, as if my face had become the center of attention, not out of affection, but out of derision. The hand that held the fork trembled. The food, which I still chewed with difficulty, turned to sand in my mouth. I didn't react. I didn't get up. I didn't scream. I just lowered my eyes and continued there, eating in silence, as if it had all gone through me like a blade. But she didn't stop. Really? There are things that should stay at home. This is a party, not a war hospital. This time the laughter was less, more restrained. Some even tried to change the subject, looked at her with discomfort. But the damage was already done. And I remained motionless, because sometimes the only thing left for a man is silence. But I'll tell you a truth that maybe only those who went through this understand. It wasn't the comment that hurt the most. It was the way no one defended me. Nobody said, "Hey, don't talk about him like that." Nobody, nor the ones who hugged me on arrival, nor those who said they missed it. Their silence weighed more than her words, and in that moment, I discovered that public shame doesn't need a noisy audience. Sometimes all it takes is one person talking loudly and a lot of people keeping quiet together. I'm here, opening my heart, telling a story that bled me inside. And if you're out there listening carefully, if this story moved you in any way, leave a like on this video, subscribe here to the channel. It's not out of vanity, no. It's just because I still have a lot in store to tell. And every gesture of yours shows me that I'm not alone in this silence. After that scene, no one else came to my table. The conversations came back, the songs played, the children ran. But all around me, it was as if a field had opened up, isolating me from the rest. I stayed there for another 2 hours, without hearing a word, without exchanging a look, just chewing the little that the pain let pass, and thinking, is this what awaits me from now on? To be remembered only as the old man with the swollen face. But time has a curious way of adjusting things, because what I experienced that night, painful as it was not yet the end. The answer would come, and not from my mouth, because there are times when life really rises and speaks for those who have chosen silence. But can you imagine what might have happened to that woman afterwards? Because when justice comes in the right way, it doesn't scream, it reveals itself, and no one can escape. It wasn't anger that I felt. It was something else, something deeper, darker, quieter. It was a kind of grief, a mourning for myself, as if, there at that table with a fork in my hand and my face hot with shame, I had died a little inside. But I didn't cry. I'm not a man of easy tears. I've cried all I had to cry when I buried the woman who loved me with the face I had before. What she did to me there, in front of everyone, was not just mockery. It was a cut in the flesh of dignity, a kind of invisible murder, one of those that no one sees but that the victim feels even in the bone. I stood up in silence. No one noticed. I went to the bathroom of the hall. Cold light, merciless mirror. I looked at myself. The swelling seemed greater in that light. The skin stretched, reddened, the eye half closed, and even so I stood there, staring at my reflection for long minutes. I washed my face with ice water. It dripped on the collar, and when I raised my head again, I whispered softly to myself, "You're still here." And it was at that moment that I understood something that I carry to this day. Sometimes silence is not weakness. It's a shield. It is protection. It is a shield against those who do not deserve to hear our pain. I went back to the table. I sat for a while longer, but I couldn't listen to any music anymore. The voices were distant, as if I were underwater. I looked at the clock. The congratulations had not yet happened, but I didn't want to participate anymore. I left without saying goodbye. I crossed the hall with calm steps, as if there was no hurry to leave a place where I was never really received. In the parking lot, I got in the car and spent a few minutes with my hand on the wheel, taking a deep breath. It was as if the weight of that night was pushing my shoulders down. I started the engine and drove for almost 2 hours until I got home. The road seemed to mirror my state of mind. Long, dark, silent. I didn't turn on the radio. I didn't make stops. I just drove. The city was asleep when I parked. The house was cold as always. I went in, took off my cap, hung up my coat, and sat down in the armchair in the living room. I stayed there. I didn't turn on the light. I didn't eat. I didn't take a shower. I just stayed there. The clock on the wall was 3:30 when I realized that I had not yet moved a muscle. I looked out the window and saw the sky clearing, the sun coming slowly, shyly, as if apologizing for another day. And I was there, tired, but awake, wounded, but whole. Because that night, even though I was bleeding inside, I made the hardest choice of my life. I chose not to lower myself, and this choice, it would still make all the difference. But have you ever stopped to think about what happens when life listens to what we shut up? Because that week, she listened, and he answered. But she answered in her own way, the way only fate knows how to do. Want to know how? So wait for what came next, because it was there that everything started to change. The days that came after the party were harder than I expected. And look, I've lived winter in the countryside. I've buried a comrade in war. I've been widowed in a hospital room where you could only hear the beep of the machine. But nothing prepared me for the kind of cold that is being ignored where we were once dear. On Monday, I went to the market. I needed to buy a few things: wholemeal bread, chamomile tea, a new bottle of painkiller. I entered with my head down, cap on my forehead, mask covering half of my face. Not because of the disease, but because of the shame. I walked to the grain aisle, and a lady who saw me coming turned the cart sharply and went to the other side. He didn't even look back. At the pharmacy, the cashier, a girl I had seen several times who always talked about the weather, looked at me and said, "It's treating, right? Is this contagious?" It wasn't with malice, I think. It was ignorance. But even so, it hurt. In the queue, I felt the eyes of other customers crossing me, as if I were an anomaly, a walking scare, a strange animal that escaped from the place where it should be hidden. I returned home with the bag shaking in my hands. The wind seemed to laugh at me. On Tuesday, I went to the church cafe, as I used to go every week. I sat on the same bench, ordered the same black coffee with 2 drops of sweetener. But something has changed. 2 ladies, who always offered me corn cakes and talked about their grandson and soap operas, stopped talking as soon as I arrived. They stared at the glass as if it were more interesting than my presence. After a few minutes they got up. They said, "Good morning," without looking me in the eye, and left. At that moment, I knew. The story had spread. The phrase of the party. That phrase from Olivia. It ran like wind in the open field. I was no longer the veteran Paul, the polite widower who read Proverbs at Mass. I was the man with the swollen face, the one that was mocked in front of everyone, the deformed. And this new name, no one forgets easily. Do you know what's worse? It is not to be a laughing stock. It's becoming a subject. People who have never hugged you start commenting on your life as if it were the plot of a series. He had a horrible face, right? His son's niece said he shouldn't even have left the house. They're saying it's a serious illness. It was as if I had stopped being a person to become a spectacle. And I thought, how can a single sentence, spoken with malice in a moment of vanity, ruin decades of history? Because I wasn't always like this, silent in a corner. No, I've been invited to speak at school. I've already told my war stories to curious young people. I have already been called an example. I have already been applauded in a crowded auditorium. What now? Now I can barely cross paths with the neighbor without him lowering his head, pretending he didn't see me. But I expected in silence. I remembered what my father said. He who endures shame with dignity receives double honor back. I just didn't know when this return would come. And let me tell you something. This is where the story begins to change. It may seem like you've hit rock bottom, but no. I still had a thread of hope, and it was by it that I clung to. Because in the midst of so much pain, something began to take shape. A subtle movement, like someone who prepares life to pay back with class. And I felt inside me, this story is still going to turn. And when it turns, it will be in front of everyone. But can you imagine what happens to those who made fun of someone who had nothing left to lose? Because what came next? No one expected it, much less her. His face still hurt, but it was no longer the same aggressive swelling of those first days. The antibiotic began to take effect. The skin slowly returned to its place, and the red gave way to a purplish tone, like an old bruise. I followed the treatment correctly, ointment in the morning and evening, medicine on a full stomach. Still, he avoided mirrors. Not because the reflection scared me like before, but because I didn't want to attach myself to a face. A face is just a facade, and I had already understood that what really hurt me was not the appearance, it was the way they looked at me. That's it. This has no cream that solves it. I started walking in Highland Park, here in Rochester. He went early, with a cap on his head and a slower step than the others. Nobody knew me there, and that's precisely what cured me a little. Anonymity. The looks were neutral. People passed me as if I were part of the landscape. No judgment, no whispering. Just an old man walking among trees. And there, among dry leaves and empty benches, I began to breathe better. On one of those days, I stopped at a bench near the lake. The sun hit lightly, and the wind brought that smell of damp earth, of new leaves sprouting. I was quiet, just hearing the sound of the water, when a little girl came walking towards me with her grandmother. He must have been about 5 or 6 years old, blonde, round cheek, bow in her hair. She looked at me with the curiosity that only children have, without malice. He approached slowly, with his eyes fixed on my face, and asked, "Grandpa, why is your face hurting?" The grandmother blushed with embarrassment, tried to pull the girl by the arm, apologizing, but I smiled. For the first time since that party, I really smiled. With a crooked face, yes, but really. I looked at her and replied, "Because life leaves marks, honey. Sometimes on the outside, sometimes inside." She kept looking at me as if she wanted to understand it all, but soon she was distracted by a leaf on the floor and went to play. Grandmother thanked me with teary eyes, and I felt something different. It was at that moment, with such a pure question and such a simple answer, that I realized I didn't need to take revenge on anyone. I didn't need to plan anything, nor defend myself, nor prove that I was worthy. Truth lives in time. Those who act with malice sooner or later show who they are, and those who carry pain with dignity eventually find peace. No, there is a kind of relief that does not come when we scream. It only comes when we shut up. And he is silent with the certainty that he does not need to beat the other. He just needs to beat his own grudge. Can I pause here to ask you something? Have you ever felt that you have been hurt, humiliated, or singled out, and yet decided not to lower himself? He just kept quiet, swallowed hard, and went on with his head held high? If you've experienced this, write here in the comments. A simple sentence, just so I know that I'm not talking to emptiness. It can be, "I understand you," or "I know how it is," or just "it's true," because when we share this kind of pain, it becomes lighter for everyone. After that day in the park, I started to come back to myself. Still slowly, still silent, but different. I no longer expected anyone to apologize. He also did not wish harm on anyone. I just wanted to live without carrying weight on my back. But life, life. She has a mysterious way of acting when you decide not to get dirty. And believe me, when it acts, no one escapes, because it was there. In that phase of acceptance, that fate began to move. And when it moved, it was in a way that no one expected, much less her. Are you prepared to see what happened to those who thought they would never fall? Because I saw it with my own eyes. And to this day, I remember the silence that took over the whole place. A few weeks later, my sister Martha called me again. This time, it was not a birthday or graduation. It was a charity tea. That kind of event that brings together the oldest families in the city, the most well-known names, people who smile a lot but listen little. I hesitated. I was still getting used to the new rhythm of my life, with the silence of others and with my own. But she insisted. He said it would be good for me to go out for a while, see people, have tea, listen to light music. And then he blurted out, as if accidentally blurting out, "Oh, Olivia will be there too. It looks like he's going to make a presentation." I just said, "That's right." Neither pain, nor anger, nor surprise. Just a silent acceptance, one of those that we carry when we are tired of fighting for space in a place that is not ours. This time, I didn't choose the best shirt, nor did I put on cologne, nor did I hide my face with a cap or scarf. I went as I was, as I am, without armor, no makeup. I arrived early, as I always like to do. People who arrive early observe better. I saw the tables being arranged, the tablecloths ironed, the flower arrangements being placed carefully. I chose a table in the back, a corner chair, where I could see everything without being in the middle of anything. And there I stayed. Gradually, the hall was filled. Women in light dresses, men in sports jackets, well-behaved children holding hands with their mothers. The music was soft, almost elevator-like. The smell of peppermint tea mingled with cakes and shortbread. Everyone talked quietly, as if that piece was too fragile to withstand any tone above what was allowed. It was then that she arrived. Olivia. Same pose, even high heels, same wide smile. He walked as if he were floating. He hugged people he barely knew. He took pictures with the cup of tea in his hand as if it were an advertising campaign. There was a group around her, there always is, people who laugh at everything she says, even when it's not funny. And there she was, again, shining, as if nothing had happened, as if the shame I felt that other night had never existed. I didn't hate her. No more. I just watched. Like someone who watches a repeated movie but feels that the ending will change. She started talking into the microphone. Any speech about charity, about community, about the importance of taking care of each other. It sounded beautiful if you didn't know the person behind the voice. I, sitting in the back, just chewed a piece of cake carefully, feeling each bite weigh down the side of my jaw that wasn't as it was before. Taste wasn't the problem. It was the weight. There was something in the air, something I couldn't explain. A quiet tension, like when the sky turns grey before rain. My body felt it, even if reason didn't know it yet. There was something about to happen. Her mouth moved safely. His eyes were shining. But suddenly, something has changed. A gesture, a slight itch on the chin. Nothing much. But who has had an infection on the face? Knows the beginning. I saw it, and I felt a shiver. Would life finally respond? And if so, what would it be like to see that happening in front of everyone? Because what my eyes saw next, no one was prepared. Neither did she, much less me. At first, I thought it was just my impression. Olivia, in the middle of the room, continued with her usual performance. She spoke loudly, gesticulated beautifully, gave those laughs that seem more rehearsed, but every now and then she brought her fingers to her face, scratching right there in the corner of her mouth. At first, it was subtle, a quick touch like someone who feels a passing itch, but as time went on, her hand came back more often, and the smile that once seemed chiseled, began to fail. Her lips stretched with effort, as if her face no longer obeyed in the same way. Something inside me woke up. It was not revenge, it wasn't anger, it was a tension, silent need. A part of me recognized every gesture because I had already lived it, the discomfort in the chin, the heat rising through the skin, the redness arriving quietly, warning that something worse was coming. The people around her still haven't noticed, but I saw it. I saw it before everyone else, the flush around the mouth becoming more marked, the contour of the cheek gaining volume, her hand trying to disguise it, passing lightly, as if she didn't want to attract attention. But her eyes were no longer calm. Behind the makeup, something was beginning to bubble. Insecurity, discomfort, fear, and what was forced smiles turned into an exchange of strange looks between the small group that surrounded her. A girl in a pink dress even whispered in the other's ear, pointing discreetly. That's when Olivia realized. And then the tables turned. She stopped talking. He chuckled. He ran his whole hand over his face in a hurry, as if he wanted to pull out what he didn't understand. And then left, suddenly, in the most human way possible. Quickly, without saying anything, crossing the room with the crooked posture of someone who needs to get to the mirror right away. He went to the bathroom, and I continued to sit. I didn't move. I didn't comment to anyone. I just watched. The same silence that covered me weeks before now accompanied me again, but for another reason. It was the silence of those who witness fate begin to act. I didn't want that. I didn't root for her to get sick, nor to go through what I went through. But there in that chair, as the ambient sound remained soft and the cutlery clinked in the cups, one thing was clear inside me. The wheel had turned. And when life decides to pay back, it's not by shouting. It's calm, accurately, justly. If this piece of my life can become a mirror or a hug for someone? Will it help me to carry it forward? Like and subscribe here to the channel. It makes more difference than you think. I'm just an old man telling what he lived. But sometimes that's enough to reach a heart on the other side. Olivia took a long time to return, and when he returned, the hall was no longer the same, and neither did she. Do you want to know what everyone saw when she reappeared? Because that was the real beginning of the end, and I saw it with my own eyes, and I kept quiet, as always. But the whole world was silent together. When Olivia returned from the bathroom, it was as if a new character had entered the room. Her heels were still hitting the wooden floor, her dress was still impeccable, but her face, the face was no longer the same. Her left cheek, which hours before had sustained a perfectly smoky blush, was now swollen, reddened, as if something had grown inside wanting to come out. The skin pulled the corner of her mouth down, and the smile, which had previously seemed natural, became a crooked, uncomfortable expression. She tried to maintain her posture, continued to move safely, but she could see that something there had turned inside out, and it wasn't just on the skin. It was inside, in the soul. He got closer to the usual group. He tried to make a joke, something about the dry weather that is ruining everyone's skin. But no one laughed. One of the girls, who had previously stuck to her like a shadow, stepped back half a step. The other pretended to receive a message on her cell phone and walked away. Olivia tried to reposition herself in the room, forcing the lightness she no longer had. He stopped near the candy table, straightened his hair, looked at his cell phone camera, and struck. But no one approached to take the photo. And those who passed by, he avoided staring. That's when someone, I don't know who, maybe the mother of one of the children, let out loud enough to echo, "Olivia, is everything okay? Your face is kind of, dunno, it looks like an allergy." The silence that followed was heavy. She smiled, or at least tried. The right side of the mouth followed, but the left, he was trapped. That was more uncomfortable than any diagnosis. She put her hand to her face, disguising it. "Oh, it must be just a little reaction, silly thing," he said, laughing, even with his face visibly distorted. But no one answered. No one has reinforced. No one laughed together. The wheel began to disperse, as if the glamour had evaporated. And she stood there, in the middle of the room, surrounded by space, and I continued to sit in the same corner with my now cold cup of tea. There was no satisfaction in my chest, just a deep silence. The same silence that I took with me at that other party, when I was the target. But now it was different, because what hurt her wasn't just physical. It was vanity that rotted slowly, exposed. It was the applause that disappeared. It was the inverted reflection of what she herself had done to me, and what hurts the most in people like this. That's when the world stops admiring. At this point in life, we learn that what comes back stronger. Not because life is cruel, but because it is fair. And those who have hurt with laughter one day feel the pain of being seen with silence. And let me tell you something. If this story has touched you in any way so far, stay with me, because the strongest is yet to come. There is a moment, and it comes soon, that changes everything once and for all, when her pride breaks entirely in front of everyone. And then, no one can pretend anymore. Are you ready to see what happens when the stage dismantles and the audience turns its back? Because that's exactly what comes next. And I was there. I saw every detail, and I never forgot it. What I saw at that moment, sitting at the back of the room, was something that no words in the world can fully describe. Olivia, who once floated between groups with the confidence of someone who believes she is untouchable, now sweated, literally. The heat didn't come from the environment. It came from within. Her skin, which had previously reflected light under the perfect makeup, now glowed in a different way. Nervous sweat running down the side of her face that was already covered with redness. The swelling had gone up. You could see it from afar. His cheeks seemed inflamed. His eyes lost their sparkle, and one side of his face began to pull his gaze, as if he was tired of holding up the mask. The conversations, which had previously echoed in the hall, slowly died down, as if everyone was watching something they didn't know if they should comment. The music played, but it seemed in the background, as if the whole environment had surrendered to a heavier silence. And it was in this silence that she excused herself. I said something like, "I'll be right back. It's just a silly heat," but no one answered. No one said, "Okay," nor, "Do you want help?" She left alone. And it was at that moment that I understood what true emptiness was. I didn't follow her. I didn't even need to. I already knew the way. The hallway that leads to the bathroom, the mirror over the white sink, the cold lights on the ceiling that forgive no defect. I knew what she would see there, the same one I saw when I walked into that bathroom weeks before, washing my face with shaky hands, trying to understand why this was happening to me. I knew what that mirror would say. Because that kind of mirror doesn't lie. He gives back everything, what is on the outside and what is on the inside. And it's curious how certain images stay with us. Because even without having seen Olivia there, alone, crying, I did. I saw it with the memory of my own pain. She must have been there, holding back her tears with wounded pride, trying to fix her hair, hurriedly wiping the corner of her mouth. But what hurt her at that moment was not only her face. It was the breaking of the image, the end of the pose. It was to be seen the way she really was, vulnerable, human, and perhaps, for the first time, silent. Some memories are like that, right? They stay in us as if they had just happened. And no matter how much time passes, the smell of the environment, the sound of fluorescent light, the cold of the tap, everything comes back. And when it comes back, it hurts as if it were now. Tell me something. Do you have any memories like that? The ones that stick, that you never forgot? If you do, share it in the comments. By dividing it, the pain subsides a little. Maybe someone reads and feels less alone. Olivia took a while to get out of the bathroom. When he returned, he no longer walked with the same firmness. His shoulders were slumped, his eyes were fleeing from any contact. He tried to sit near a group, but no one made room. She smiled, a crooked, tired smile, and the worst, empty. No one smiled back. That's when she understood. The humiliation she gave me that day had returned, but not to the same extent. He came back bigger, he came back heavy. She came back in silence, the same silence she forced me to swallow. And me? I continued to sit. I didn't even move the glass. I just took a deep breath, looking at the scene unhurriedly, because sometimes time doesn't take revenge. He just gives it back, and when it returns, no one escapes. But let me tell you something. The worst for her was yet to come, because physical discomfort is one thing, it is abandonment. And that's when her penny started to drop. Do you want to know what happened after she tried to reconnect with the people around her? Because the worst answer didn't come with words. It came with absences. He came with his back turned, and that's how the whole room showed which side it was on. I saw it. I felt it. And to this day, I remember the way she stood still, not knowing where to go. You'll see. The room was colder now, or maybe it was just what I felt inside. I went to the counter to get another coffee. It was already the third cup, and it wasn't even for the taste. It was just to keep your hands busy, your eyes moving, as if trying to look busy so as not to let yourself be invaded by memories. As I walked slowly, feeling the smooth floor under my worn shoes, I saw her coming in the opposite direction. Olivia, the same one who, weeks ago, laughed at me as if I were a spectacle apart from the party. The same one that turned my face into a joke. But now, there was no more laughter. He no longer had that confident gait, nor the exaggerated gleam of teeth that loved to appear in selfies. Her face was different, really swollen, pulling lightly on the left side, and the eyes. The eyes were no longer steady. When he saw me, he turned away. He lowered his gaze, as if looking for a hole to get into. He said nothing, me neither. But there, in that corridor between the tables and the counter, something happened that marked me more than any words. A woman who was next to her, friend, maybe, took a quick look at Olivia, whispered something low, and walked away. No hug, no question. Without, "Are you okay?" Soon after, another woman who shared the table with her got up, took her bag and changed seats. There was no scandal. No one pointed the finger. But the message was clear. No one wanted to share the space with her. The space of before, where she reigned, now seemed surrounded by glass, as if her presence contaminated, and I, who stopped 2 steps away, just watched. There was nothing I wanted to say. No well done. No irony to throw back. In war, we learn that sometimes the greatest punishment is to survive one's own arrogance. And there she was, surviving yours. She still tried to maintain the pose. She tried to fix her hair, forced a half smile, but her body gave everything. His shoulders were no longer straight. Her legs were shaking a little. And when the tears began to flow slowly, not from pain, but from shame, she turned, covered her face with both hands, and walked out of the room. He did not ask for permission. He didn't say goodbye. She left in a hurry from someone who already understood that the party was over for her, even with the music playing, and it was only then that the silence of the room took on a different tone. No one laughed. Nobody went after it. No one murmured words of consolation. It was that kind of silence that weighs in the air, that fills our chest with a strange feeling, not of pity, but of judgment. A judgment that does not come from anyone's mouth, but from the collective gaze. And the worst is that she felt it. It's curious how life takes turns that we don't even expect anymore. Because you see, I didn't want that. I didn't ask her to feel what I felt on her skin. But when the world turns, and it really does, it takes with it everything that the person has planted, and in this case, she reaped what she watered with derision. I looked out the window, trying to take a deep breath, digest what had just happened. The cup of coffee warmed my hand, but inside, I was cold. Cold of feeling, cold of memory. Because as much as I had kept quiet, that I hadn't lowered myself to her level, it was still my story that was there. The mirror was inverted, but the pain, the real pain, was still in my chest. And do you believe that even after that there was still more? Because the party has not stopped. People pretended that nothing happened, but their eyes crossed, as if they were all trying to understand what they had seen. And the most interesting thing, that's what came after. An unexpected invitation, a change in the way they started to look at me. But this, I'll tell you that right away, because sometimes, after someone's fall, we see who really remains standing. And what happened in the following days, it changed more than her image. Mine changed too. Are you ready to know what it was? Because what's next, it tastes like silent justice. The news came from Martha's mouth, on an afternoon when she stopped by the house to leave some apple cakes and talk a little. We sat on the porch, as we did in the old days, and she, a little awkwardly, started a conversation. "Paul, did you hear about Olivia?" he asked, stirring the sugar in his tea as if trying to sweeten something bitter. I just shook my head. No, I hadn't heard anything. "Yes, she's hospitalized. He caught a nasty infection on his face. Bacterial cellulitis, they said, just like yours." The silence that followed was not one of surprise, but of confirmation. The wheel had turned completely. What she had mocked so much now lived in her skin, and with an aggravating factor, when the pain came, she had no one to share. That lecture she was going to give at a university about image and self-esteem, cancelled. The videos he posted every day, showing snippets of perfect life, disappeared. More than her face, it was her presence that disappeared. And more than the disease, it was the abandonment that hurt. Because, you see, what caught my attention the most was not the infection. It was the silence around her. The friends who once surrounded her are gone. The messages in the group stopped. No one posted any more photos with her. No one asked where she was. That's it, my friend. This hurts more than any bacteria. Olivia, who lived on appearances, who shaped her existence by the reflection of others, now found no reflection at all, because when her image broke, no one wanted to pick up the pieces. And I sat there, listening to Martha tell things little by little, as if drawing a portrait of ruin. I found myself months before in that same place, but with me it was different, because despite all the crooked looks, I still had Martha. I had my quiet coffees with old Tom at church. There was the boy from the pharmacy who offered me a sincere good morning. I was not beautiful, nor popular, nor loved by many, but I never went alone. And her. It was enough for the face to cease to be a mirror of vanity, that everything fell apart. Friendships could not resist the absence of beauty. The doors closed when there were no more bright smiles to show. And then I understood. Those who build their identity on the humiliation of others eventually stumble upon their own image. I didn't vibrate. I was not happy. It would be cowardice to feed on her pain, which she did to me. But I confess that I felt a kind of peace. A peace that is born when the world shows that it still knows how to put everything in its place. When justice comes without having to shout. No need for a fist or response. Only time and the truth. And you know what? The most curious thing came later, when I realized how all this started to change the way they looked at me too. Because time didn't just mess with her. It messed with everything. And people's reaction to me, well, that part you need to hear. Because sometimes the comeback comes from where we least expect it. Returning to Rochester was like putting my feet back on solid ground after crossing a raging river. I didn't need anything extraordinary, just my routine. And it was there that I found my peace again. The first stop was Willie's barber shop, a place I've been going to since I moved here with Helen right after I left the army. Willie, with that talc-stained apron and the always soft talk, looked at me and said, "Paul, you look lighter." I just smiled, as if carrying a secret in my pocket. The marks were still there, light, faded by time and antibiotics, but no one looked at them like they used to. What once caused astonishment now aroused respect. No pity, respect. I also went to the corner cafe, the one that serves the best cinnamon bread in town. The cashier girl, new there, handed me the change and asked quietly, "Are you feeling better?" And I said yes, because it was true, not only physically, but inside, where the wounds usually hurt for longer. There, in that hot cup of coffee, I felt the world spinning back on track. And in church on Sunday, when I sat in the pew as usual, a lady I don't know well, I think her name is Ruth, came over and held my hand gently and said, "You have beautiful strength, Paul." That caught me in a good way, because she didn't talk about the strength in her arms, nor the health of her face. It was another force, the one we carry when we decide not to fight back, when we hold on and shut up when the world wants to see screaming. There are things that we live and keep, but maybe by telling we help another heart to breathe. Like this video, and sign up, and let's make this story reach those who need it. Because sometimes what you carry in silence can illuminate someone's darkness. I didn't say anything to Ruth. I just shook her hand back and let the silence speak for me. It was in this silence that I understood that I did not become weaker for having suffered, nor less of a man for not having responded. Backwards. What they did to me called all my ghosts. The words of that girl, the mockery, the averting looks, all that could have broken me for good. But I stood up, not with pride, nor with anger. I stood because there was something in me that said, "You're still you." And that was enough. Some called me weak. He should have reacted. I should have told some good truths. I should have put her in her place. But today, the same ones who thought that are the ones who look at me differently. Not with pity, but with a kind of admiration that cannot be easily explained, because living in silence, enduring what seems unbearable, is not cowardice. It is silent courage. And those who have never needed this courage, maybe one day they will. What I was taught in war is that we don't always win by shooting. Sometimes the greatest victory is to survive and return home with a whole heart. And that's what I did. I went back to my routine, my coffee, my park benches, my quiet solitude. And I found out that she, the one who humiliated me, took the stage. But I stayed with the story. And you know what? The world does not turn only strongly. It rotates with time. And time still had one more thing to show me. Something that would leave me speechless again, but for a completely different reason. It was on a clear afternoon, one of those that the sun does not punish but warms up slowly, that I walked through Highland Park again. It had been a long time. A lot of time. The last time I was there, I carried the recent pain on my face, and in my chest, a silence that barely fit inside me. But that day, I just wanted to breathe. I walked slowly among the trees, listening to the rustling of leaves, and sat down on the usual bench near the reflecting pool. That calm water has always had something magical about it. Reflect without distorting. Show the truth without haste. In front of me, a group of young people were playing with their cell phones, laughing, posing, making faces. One of them, wearing a backwards cap and an easy smile, looked at me and shouted, "Hey, sir, do you want to take one with us?" That made me laugh low. I replied with a gentle nod, denying. "Leave this to the next veteran," I joked. They laughed and went back to their mess, and I went back to looking at my reflection in that still water. There were still marks. The skin pulled a little on one side. The color was irregular, but it didn't hurt anymore. And I'm not talking about physical pain. I'm talking about that pain that we carry in our eyes, even when the face seems calm. She no longer lived there, and it was there, looking at myself, that something settled inside. I thought, "Look, Paul, you've arrived." It may seem simple to those who listen, but for me, it was like crossing a bridge that seemed infinite. And look, if you're still here listening to me, I want to tell you something from the bottom of my heart. There's still more. The strongest part of this story is coming, because sometimes we think that justice comes in a snap, in an epic gesture, but it comes in the detail, and when it arrives, it doesn't ask permission. I continued to sit there, remembering my Helen, the way she adjusted my collar before I left, the smell of her coffee in the morning. I remembered the boys, so far away today, each one in their own life, and I remembered the war, not only the one I fought with a rifle, but the one I faced here, inside me, because the biggest battle of my life was not in Vietnam. It was the one I lived without a uniform, without a trench, against shame, against the gaze of others, against the impulse to take revenge, and I won, with what I had left, silence. At that moment, I understood that it was no longer a man trying to erase a wound. I was a man who learned to carry it with dignity, who discovered that scars are not defects, they are memory. It's a sign that it hurt, but it's gone, that there was a struggle, but there was also resistance. I got up from the bench and took another walk around the park. The world around me seemed different, although it was the same. The same park, the same trees, the same reflecting pool. But I was different. Me, Paul, the old man from Rochester, with his face scarred and his soul at peace. And that's when fate, as someone who writes calmly, gave me another page of history. And this, my friend, this one you need to hear, because that's where it all made sense. Have you ever wondered what happens when the one who hurt you seeks your forgiveness? Months have passed since that last party. Buffalo followed its routine. Families continued with their events, weddings, baptisms, and charity teas. But Olivia disappeared. No one spoke of it directly anymore. It was as if his name had become an echo that everyone preferred to ignore. Some said that she had gone to live in Chicago, to try to start over. Others whispered that he was undergoing treatment, facing heavy depression. But it wasn't mean gossip. It was almost a lament, like someone who went too far and couldn't come back. Her social networks disappeared from the air. The photos were deleted. The parties that had previously awaited his arrival now barely remembered his absence. And the most curious, it wasn't the swollen face that kept her away from the world. It was what she carried inside. The moral deformity that oozed from her mouth that night, in front of everyone, was what really disfigured her. And there is no makeup, No surgery to hide it. I didn't feel joy with that, no. The truth is that I felt something similar to grief, because deep down, I knew that she was also someone's daughter. That had history, had family. But she chose the path of arrogance, mockery, indifference, and the world just gave back what she threw out. And me, well, I remained silent, as I always have been, because there are silences that are like hugs, and there are others that are like a sentence. Hers was the latter, a silence that no one else wanted to fill, because when we really hear who a person is, we no longer need to hear what they try to say later. But would she ever understand that? Would she one day come after herself, not to justify herself, but to ask for forgiveness? Nowadays, my life is made of good silences. I wake up calmly, make my coffee, feed the birds in the backyard. Sometimes I just watch them peck at the seeds, fly, come back, as if they also had their own cycles of restarting. I'm not in a hurry for anything anymore. My days no longer need to be filled with justifications or explanations. And there's a habit that I created after all this. Writing letters I never send. Some are for my wife, others for my children who live far away. But there is one that I wrote for her, Olivia. It was on a cold night, one of those that we hear nothing but the crackling of wood burning in the fireplace. I picked up the paper slowly, as if carrying a memory that still burns, and I wrote, "You gave me the most useless pain of my life." And ironically, it also gave me the greatest test of strength I needed. Words came out like someone who takes splinters from his chest, not with anger, but with clarity. Today, I am free, not because of his fall, but because my dignity has survived your laughter. When I finished, I looked at that paper as if it were a wound that had finally healed. I walked to the fireplace, folded it slowly, and let it turn to ash. She wasn't supposed to read it. I was supposed to understand. To understand how far I have walked since that day in the salon, with a heavy fork in my hand and my face marked by shame. The letter went up in smoke, and with it went any weight that was still left in me. Now when I look in the mirror, I no longer see the man she humiliated. I see someone who has survived, not infection, but contempt. And survived the contempt, my friend. This is more difficult than a lot of war battle. I still wonder sometimes if she thought of me, if she ever looked in the mirror and remembered what she did. But you know what? It doesn't matter anymore. Because when you understand that you don't need to prove anything else to anyone, then yes, you are really free. But there's still one last thing left for me to tell you. One thing I've kept for all this time. Want to know what it was? Today, my face still bears marks. Not the ones before, red and throbbing. Those time took care of, but deeper, more subtle marks, the ones that only those who have faced contempt understand. I walk through the streets of Rochester with the same face I took to that party, only now it is accompanied by something else. Peace. Olivia. I never saw her again. I learned that he changed, that he left social networks, that he moved away from the party circle, and maybe it's better that way. Because there are falls that don't make noise but leave cracks inside. What she lost was not just beauty or status, it was the right to be heard without suspicion. And me, I got something that I never asked for, but that today I am grateful for, the certainty that I don't need to raise my voice to make myself respected. Because the day she laughed at my face, I thought I had lost everything, but when everyone was silent, it was there that I gained back who I was. Life, my friends, has a strange way of teaching. Sometimes it is in pain that we find our strength. And no, I'm not talking about that war force with a clenched fist. I'm talking about the strength of getting out of bed even with shame. To enter a full room knowing that they will look at you crookedly. To choose silence when the world pushes you to scream. Because what remains in the end is not what they said about us, but what we chose to carry or let go. Beauty that passes, but dignity. This one we build day after day with each small choice that no one sees. And you know what? It's worth it. If you have come this far with me, thank you very much. Really. Telling this was like opening an old drawer that I avoided looking at, And having you here listening to me until the end was like meeting a friend on the other side of the table. If this story touched you in any way, give me a hug in the form of a like. It helps to keep this channel alive. And if you want to come back for another coffee with me, sign up here. The house is yours. Tell me in the comments which city you are listening to me. I love to imagine where this story is going, and it activates the bell too, so you don't lose it when the coffee is ironed again. Now don't leave just yet. Listen to the next real story that will appear on the screen. Always remember, each wrinkle tells a story, and each story carries a strength. Watch the next video here on the channel with another incredible story.